I want to have a serious, non-inflammatory discussion about privilege, race, and equality. In a previous video that satirically poked fun at Tumblr concepts, I briefly glanced over the topic of white privilege. For me, this is a tough topic because while I do believe that many white people are better off than minorities, I think that using X privilege to label social advantages a certain group receives is too broad and generalizing. Something like white or male privilege generalizes an entire group of people as better off. Even if this is true, generally speaking, this does a disservice to the actions that can be taken. For example, it is true that black people have a higher percentage of poor people per capita than any other race. This would mean lawmaking policies would address the issues of minorities like black people more often. However, these laws would ignore the plight of poor white people, which even though poverty per capita for whites is much lower, there is still more poor white people just simply because of the percentage of white people and their needs are going unaddressed. Now, I believe that we are all privileged in different ways. For example, my race, Asians have greater graduation rates, income earnings, and fewer poverty rates than nearly every race. So why don't we call it Asian privilege? Furthermore, it is more important to look at individuals themselves instead of an entire group. For example, as a male, I am generally privileged as I don't have to push a person out of me if I ever want children. But as an individual, I'm privileged in the fact that I can publicly speak. I'm generally a bit smarter than the average person, and I live in a generally upper middle class place. Like, I don't need to walk 2 miles for water every single day. But as a male, I am also underprivileged in that if I get sexually assaulted, then my claims will not be taken as seriously. Furthermore, if a girl attacks me, I'm socially not expected to retaliate. The notion that individuals are privileged in different ways can be seen in comparing a 300-pound, 6-foot-tall black guy with the 100-pound kid who wears glasses and is black. Sure, if they live in a predominantly white country, both will probably get unfairly profiled. But the difference lies in which one will get beaten up more often, or which one will get targeted more often by the police. Another key difference is socioeconomic factors. If you live in a high-class, wealthy community, you'll less likely be targeted and profiled than if you live in a poor, violence-ridden neighborhood. So in my opinion, it is unfair to generalize it considering these factors. And even generally privileged groups will often face their own stereotypes. I, for example, as an Asian, I'm expected, oh yeah, there's another Asian kid, he's probably, you know, like 90% grades, is a nerd, he doesn't even do any sports. Unfortunately, I fit that stereotype pretty well. But it is based on the stereotype that I, for example, will have a harder time getting into universities like Harvard than my black or white peers. Because the fact is, there are a lot of Asians going to Harvard and they want more diversity. However, more diversity is not necessarily good, especially if it's a form of forced equality. Forced equality is incredibly problematic and Marxist. Equality of opportunity is a much better idea than all-out equality. It means that everybody will have the same opportunity to succeed, and if they are not, that needs to be dealt with, as historically it has. For example, things like the Equal Pay Act of 1963 allowing all genders to have equal pay for equal work. However, forced equality like affirmative action or quotas attempts to bring minorities higher by pushing the majority down. Let's say, for example, in a profession with a white majority, affirmative action would encourage more minorities to be hired. Thus, minorities would be hired in favor of white people. This means a more qualified white person would be rejected unfairly in order for a less qualified Hispanic or black person to get hired. Remember, correlation does not imply causation. In the 1960s, when some places had little to no minorities hired, then we could safely assume discrimination may have been involved. Now, if only 10% of the company was black, that could simply mean that either there are less black people within the population or less black people are interested in this. The same principle applies with gender roles and quotas, which is also the reason why I think that the gender wage gap does not exist. Another issue I have with privilege is how this concept can be interpreted and received. I've already covered how certain people exclude white people from conversations, for example, the white privilege Tumblr and condescending prick Sui Park. It is unhelpful when certain people are denied the ability to simply voice their opinions just because they are a majority, because you want to improve race relations, not block off an entire race. I mean, this is combating racism with even more racism. It creates a hierarchy, as seen in something like the progressive stack. Oh my god, the progressive stack. Another example of bad reception is that this is being taught in schools, not as a debatable concept, but as a fact, like a way of life. Like how schools in communist countries taught how wonderful communism is and how you should embrace it. Well, it's indoctrination of children. You're explaining a complex, controversial topic to kids too young to know differently. So in conclusion, do I think that white people are generally better off than other races? Well, yes and no. I think a better definition of my opinion is that certain minorities like blacks and Hispanics are generally more underprivileged than other races. I do think that terms like white privilege is ultimately unhelpful. It oversimplifies and generalizes a complex issue in our society. And a lot of times it focuses on first world issues like, I want more Asian representation in movies. No, I don't give a damn, okay? The fact that there are less Asian characters in movies does not mean that you're actively getting discriminated against. I mean, it's not like you're not allowed to make your own Asian character and put it into a movie. Personally, I don't care about Asian characters in movies, but if you do care, then go do it yourself instead of expecting other people to do it for you. Remember, equality of opportunity instead of forced equality. As Christina Summers says, check your facts, not your privilege.